Things are escalating on so many fronts. In the past, I've pointed out that I try to intentionally keep the channel calm, and I've stated that if I was ever concerned about something, I told you would be the first to know. And yeah, at the moment, I'm concerned. Last Friday, I was about to record this video, but instead I decided to kind of sit on it for about a week, or initially the weekend, but here we are a week later, and just really marinate, kind of think this through, and I'm glad I did. I've tried to compress my thoughts down into a very succinct and to the point video. So I ask you to stick around to the end, as I'm going to cover a lot of ground that I think is very important at this time for the community. So let's talk about it. Before we jump into this video, I do want to draw attention to Bear Independent's YouTube channel, TJ Morris. I'm going to link to a video that he just recently released. And what he did is he encouraged the community, if there's any way that you can help, he and his team are going down to Florida to help families, one in particular at this moment, in this aftermath of Hurricane Ian. They're asking for volunteers or anything that you can do to help. He has a ministry called Grindstone Ministries. I wish I could make it out there personally. I can't, so I made a donation to his ministry, and I'll provide a link to his donation page. And I realize that funds are tight for everyone right now, but any donation, I'm sure, would make a big difference, even if it's $5, $10, whatever you have. I don't get any kickback for the shout out. I just want to help them out any way I can. I used to be an occupational minister years ago, and I had to raise financial support. And a lot of times it wasn't the large donations that made a difference. It was a lot of the smaller donations that added up over time that really helped me do what I did. So on that note, if you can help his ministry in any way, I'm sure it would be a huge help as they're helping families down there. So in the past, I told you that if I was ever concerned, I would let you know. So what am I concerned about right now? There's two primary things. And let's start with the obvious. The threat of nuclear war that's hanging in the air. Last Thursday, I found myself a bit upset. I was borderline anxious, and I haven't been like that in quite some time. After the annexation of the 4 areas in Ukraine and Russia announcing that they're going to defend the territory by any means necessary, things I would say begin to kind of hit home in such a way that I realized things could go sideways very quickly. Depending on who you listen to, the severity of how quick that timeline or when it's going to happen kind of varies. It's obviously on everyone's mind at the moment in this community. I look at a lot of different comments, forum postings, different areas where preppers hang out. I listen, and yeah, it's a big concern that a lot of people are concerned about. I will say one quick side note, or give a quick side note. I've had several vendors that have been approaching me lately asking me to promote various survival gear as it's flying off their shelves, as you can imagine. And look, here's my word to you right now. I do not recommend that you buy survival gear if you are in a state of fear and panic. Doing this will be something I promise you'll regret later. If you're going to buy anything right now, keep working on your food inventory and water storage. You can't go wrong doing that. Apart from that, just chill and wait for the right time. Wait when you're not in a state of panic and circle back at that time. I apologize for that tangent, but after sitting on this issue for quite a while and thinking it through, here's my take on it. I'm 46 years old, and I am what's called a Gen Xer. I grew up at a time, and I've seen a lot of things in my short life. I'd like to say it's a short life. I don't consider myself that old at this point. But I grew up seeing the threat of nuclear war in the 80s. I watched the AIDS epidemic roll around when I was in high school. I'll never forget when Magic Johnson came out and made his announcement. I grew up watching, or hearing about the warnings of the ozone layer being depleted. I think it was all that hairspray that the women wore in the 80s. I'm talking about my sister primarily. If you're watching, I apologize. Don't be mad at me. I remember seeing the first Gulf War. I remember living through 9/11, the dot-com boom and bust. I saw the 2008 mortgage meltdown and watched families get decimated. I had a lot of friends and family that were severely impacted by that. I've seen my country go to war multiple times. I've watched a pandemic we all have in the last few years come through and ravage our nation. We've seen civil unrest. I've seen enough, I'll put it that way. And I've come to this conclusion in that time. When it comes to the threat of nuclear war, it's like a comment that I read in an article from a guy years ago that diffused bombs for a living. He was in the military. And one of the things he said is, either I'm right or it's suddenly not my problem anymore. And I think that's a philosophy I've come to take it on this issue at this point. I've done all I can to prepare, and if anything happens, it suddenly is not going to be a concern. If I'm in an area that ground zero. So what am I worrying about, honestly, at this point? If a nuclear exchange occurs and I'm in the immediate area, not in the immediate area, and fallout is an issue, then yeah, I would be concerned. And I've done a video in the past covering how to survive nuclear fallout. I'll link to it up in the cards and in the description section below. Look, I've got supplies for my family. We can shelter in place. We've got food, water, energy, ability to seal the house off, to keep contaminants coming in if there was a nuclear cloud, whatever that went over our area from the fallout. So I've done all I can to protect myself and my family. So at this point, what else do I have to worry about on this issue? Because it's not in my control, and it never was in my control, and it's not in your control either. And I'll tell you one more thing on this subject. It feels great being prepared the best I can. I've done everything that I can that's within my control, short of having a fallout shelter, a bunker somewhere, which is just not in my financial means at the moment. One day I'll get there. But I do cover on this channel a lot, and I've been focusing on getting prepared for winter because that's right around the corner. But I've intentionally kind of steered clear, so to speak, of the issue of nuclear war, simply because I've covered it already. I think for me, I just want to be careful at this moment to not stir people up on something that we have no control over. If you're prepared, if you can shelter in place, great. But this really leads me to my second point. I'm concerned about the misinformation on this topic and the impact that it's clearly having on this community. Anything we see telling us about being nuked, or we hear about this, how it's going to directly impact us soon, you have to remember a lot of this is propaganda or misinformation that's designed to drive fear. Now, what do I mean by that? Here's the reality. These nations that are going head to head on a lot of these things, let's just pull back for a second, talk specifically about Russia and the United States. These nations, believe me, we all know they have private back channels where this information is being discussed between the two countries. We're not privy to what they're saying. And do you think that the information that we're seeing in the media really expresses what they're going to do next? You think they're going to telegraph that out to us? You have to remember that the Kremlin, under Putin, they are experts at misinformation. If there's one thing that I will give credit to Putin for, is that he is amazing at spreading misinformation. They're masters at doing this in such a way that they can spread so many stories and create so many narratives that it creates confusion. I'm not going to go on a tangent on the specifics. I've studied this at length, and it's fascinating to see how the web create this web of misinformation, so much so that it's hard to tell up from down by the time you go through it all. And look, it's all part of the game that they play. They flood the space with different messages that contradict each other, and then people get completely bewildered and they can't work out the truth, and people live in fear as a result. And you're seeing this everywhere, that the information telling us we're going to get nuked or this is a big concern, we get flooded with this and it drives fear. And now let me pull back in 1 second and put a disclaimer on that. Do I realize that this could potentially happen? Yes. But again, I grew up watching this. I watched the saber rattling. I've seen enough of this and know that misinformation is a very, very powerful thing. And do you think Russia wants us to engage and to continue to support Ukraine? Of course not. The more they can get our own people scared, the rest of the world to back off, it plays into what they're trying to do. So my encouragement to you is please don't worry about the threats. If it were real, you're probably not going to hear about it by the time that if something were to happen, we're going to be the last to know. And here's how I see the information that we get that's being filtered down to us through different media sources. What's being said is mostly lackeys in Russia that are mostly using misinformation to keep their own people in check. It's used for propaganda, again, to keep their people in line. Part of it is obviously to scare the West, to keep us backing off, and part is amplified by our own media for clickbait to drive ad revenue. And every time you click on an article, for example, that says we're all going to die, we're all going to get nuked, that only drives up ad revenue for whatever outlet it is. So you have to keep things in perspective. Question the intent as to why you're being sold fear. Let me finish with this quote, which I would advise you to listen to and to follow. C.S. Lewis is a famous author. In 1948, he said this, and it's still relevant today. And I'm going to put the quote up on the screen. It's 3 paragraphs that we'll go through real quick. He says this: "In one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age? I am tempted to reply, Why? As you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed, as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir, madame, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented, and quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. We have indeed one very great advantage over our ancestors, anesthetics, but we have that still. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristles with such chances, and in which death itself is not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting with our friends over a pint and a game of darts. Not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies, a microbe can do that, but they need not dominate our minds. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to watch the video that I created on surviving the nuclear fallout. I'll post a link up in the cards and in the description section below. If you've done what you can, got the supplies you need, move on with your life. Yes, I'll admit, we live in unprecedented times. It's unsettling to have a superpower that has a capability threaten us with nuclear war, or any other country for that matter. It only will, if it did came down to that, of course, things would escalate rapidly. But I've done all I can, and now it's time to move on with my life. Prepare, do what you can, but please do not live in a constant state of fear. As always, stay safe out there.